I'm a consumer psychologist and the director of Insights, Global Insights at Global Web Index, and we're based in London. And a bit about us. We have basically the reputation of being active in 44 markets. That's the biggest USP, and we carry out over 430K surveys in a year. And we have 22 million online panelists that we gather data through. And of course, this data is collected quarterly, which means it's quite fresh, it's not annual. And it's about people, not devices. And the most important thing is that we have 20,000 data points available on Global Web Index. And that's consumers' information representative of 2 billion internet users globally. Everything we collect on the platform is supported by audience trends, insights reports, and infographics, and they are quite topical, or they can be just market or region specific as well. So here's just a little selection, but we also support our users with information that we curate. And this is some of the things we cover. As you can see, everything from demographics to brand perceptions to our own specific segmentations. At all points, they can be supported with custom research, and custom research is done via recontacting the online panelists, so it means you can dig even deeper into a specific audience group. So, today, I will talk you through some Generation Z, which is the younger audience, which yesterday we touched on, the 16 to 20-year-olds, and also Generation Y, which is millennials. It's a broader group, of course. But I will start with some global trends, or some, I guess, known truth from Global Web Index's data. So as you can see, there are some top-level insights here. So from North America, we know that North America is, of course, very mobile-savvy and mobile-first, but they are also still quite big on PCs and laptops. And over half already pay for digital content, and they are privacy and data-savvy, which wouldn't be a surprise to us. We go to Latin America, and we see complete mobile-first behavior, and it's a fast-growth region. And there is above global average for time spent on social media, and it's similar to North America when it comes to paid-for content. I will touch on Europe in a minute, because Europe is a bit of an outlier when we look at the regions. Asia Pacific and Middle East and Africa, they are fast growth regions, and they are surprisingly welcoming, I suppose, of new types of content or new formats, and they are both mobile first and super social savvy, to the point that innovation and content and every interaction on the internet starts and ends with social media. When we look at Europe, I was talking to one of the attendees yesterday, and we were talking about, is it Europe's cautiousness, or is it cynicism, or is it romanticism? But Europe is a bit behind, not in usage, but in terms of adoption of paid content, and in terms of how they interact on social media and what types of content they interact with on social media. So in terms of trends, before we dig into the specific regions, we now know, for instance, from the last quarter, that product search in general is now a social media affair. And we know that people interact with brands on social media, but now they are also searching for products on social media, and they prefer search engines. So we aren't quite, they prefer social search engines. We aren't quite there yet in terms of buying on social media, so buy button actually feels quite invasive still. But the good thing is product research does occur on social media. Similarly, one of the trends that are climbing up is QR codes. As you know, QR codes unlock content and partnerships and experience marketing. And QR codes went through a bit of a decline, but now they are climbing up, and year-on-year increase is quite significant. And of course, mobile devices are taking over commerce, and I'm sure you guys all know this anyway, but if you look at the quarter-on-quarter increase, you will see that mobile tipping point is about to occur globally for commerce, and that's super important. Voice technology or voice search is also a bit of a problem / opportunity because there are loads of skills and content strategy integrations that everyone needs to consider in terms of product discovery or interaction with brands or content from a publisher's perspective. 35% globally are planning to purchase voice technology or smart speakers. Their pricing strategy in the UK especially was quite, I suppose, accommodating and opportunistic, so they are quite widespread in the UK in particular. But because we started tracking them recently, I can't show you a year-on-year data, but I'm sure if we meet again next year, I can show you some more. So, Generation Z and Generation Y, why are we looking into these groups today? Because, of course, they are a huge opportunity for marketers. And Generation Y is the group that is interested, savvy, but they can also buy. Generation Z drives innovations to a degree, but they are responsible for adoption at first stage. So are they leaders or followers or a bit of both? So if you look at, apologies for the busy slide, but I was hoping to give you as much information as possible. So it's, as you can see, because this is the known truth data and this is self-reported data, this isn't passive data, it's actually users, panelists telling us who they are, what they do, how much they earn. As you can see in Asia Pacific and the Middle East, there is a bit of a skew towards male audience. And that's no surprise because internet penetration seems to be male-dominated. But on another note, if we look at affluence, people who are in the top 25% income bracket, which is very interesting because when it comes to device and content adoption, it matters. So you can see that Middle East, Africa, North America, and also Europe for Generation Z and Generation Y. Throughout the presentation, pinks are Generation Z, blues are Generation Y / millennials, so hopefully that won't be too difficult to follow. And throughout, you will see that there is a bit of an urban living context, and suburban living is mainly North America, and probably baby boomers as well, which we aren't looking into today. And these are the top 5 attitudes and self-perceptions, how they see themselves, and the differences between Generation Z and Generation Y. So as you can see, Generation Y are bigger groups for strong agreements. These are statements that they've strongly agreed with. One could argue that Generation Z's strong agreement isn't really overtaking Gen Y because Gen Z would probably be a bit more cautious about strongly agreeing with something in general because their opinions are forming. But you can see that, okay, family, money-related matters, multitasking, probably having a professional life, it does drive Generation Y behavior, but also I regularly inform friends and family on products. So Generation Y isn't so much responsible for word of mouth, but you can turn to Gen Y for it. When we look at their tech perceptions, we see that, for example, anonymity on the internet and having the latest technology. You can see that, again, there is a bit of a Gen Y takeover here. But yesterday, I did touch on, if we met before or if you were here for the panel, I just don't understand computers and new technology still for Generation Y and Generation Z are in the top 5 tech perceptions. And it's interesting because we were talking about how fast innovations diffuse versus how fast we actually create content when people don't have the devices to consume them on. What does it matter to us, really? So brand engagement for Generation Y and Generation Z, based on everything we know. Brand associations tend to increase with older age. Again, we're looking at brand attitudes at the moment. I'm a brand-conscious person, and I like to stick with a brand once I find one I like. For Generation Y, you can see that there is a bigger tendency. And again, we talked about promiscuity of Generation Z when they are interacting with brands. This is no surprise. For brand discovery, this is an interesting one. For Generation Z and Y, the closest group is the pre-roll ads, and of course pre-roll ads in the age of video content. And this is an interesting point because, of course, Generation Y prefer the old ways and they still like the traditional way of discovering brands. And word-of-mouth recommendations, they actually are bigger reasons to discover a brand for both generations. And we will come to how that works on social media shortly. But you can see here that actually the old ways aren't dead yet. And brand research. We talked about product research when we were looking at global trends. Now we are looking at brand research. It has moved to social networks. And that is true for Generation Z in particular, so the younger audiences in particular. They are basically going to social media before search engines, while, of course, Generation Y are still search engine driven. But in fast growth regions such as LATAM and Middle East and Africa, you see that Generation Y are also turning to social networks. So it's the social advertising, social marketing strategy, but also, I suppose, how owned content is surfaced on social media beyond the paid media strategy becomes important here. I'm going to dive into, take a nosedive into some more traditional media data, and then I will quickly take you out of the mobile and device data. So, mobile leads time spent online per day, of course. This is no surprise to us, but the mobile tipping point has already happened for Generation Z. So they actually don't go to other devices, whereas Generation Y, this is global, is very, very close. And I gave you the global data on purpose because it's huge. It means actually, yes, everything, it's not about optimization, it's about the norm. And Generation Y, of course, they passed the mobile tipping point in Asia Pacific already. This is an interesting slide, I think. So, okay, if device, as a device, mobile is the most important thing, and they spend time on mobile the most, you can see people who are actually sharing devices with 2 or more people per region, per generation. I also apologize for my ugly slides, but all this data was super hard to visualize in an aesthetically pleasing way. So most of the slides are bar charts, but I hope you get the idea. So you can see that devices are shared among young audiences. Why? Because they don't have the money to get them. And so especially in fast growth regions, they share. The more mature the market, the less likely that they will share. So one could say that you could potentially trust the passively collected usage data from mature markets because they tend to use personal devices. This is no news to anyone, but again, it would be wrong not to touch on social media usage, but YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, these aren't news anymore. However, what's very clear to see here is that younger audiences prefer the entertaining, the visual platforms, whereas purpose is more kind of Gen Y territory. However, even when they are driven by entertaining content, that is the purpose, and they specifically go to Snapchat if that's the type of content that makes them tick. Gen Z under-index for more than 4 or 5 social networks on average, which means they don't spread themselves too thinly, but they are very specific in choice of channels. So North America and Europe, when we look at time spent, Generation Z and Generation Y differences, you can see the minutes difference per region. This is a bit of a hard one to get your head around, but basically Europe and North America, Gen Y, are the furthest behind. So this slide on its own shows you how generations in fast growth regions are getting closer and closer, and you don't have to treat them separately necessarily. but they definitely need to be treated separately from the mature. At Global Web Index, we have quite a few different segmentations for digital behavior, social media usage, and content. But here, just to give you a snapshot, sorry. You can see for Generation Z, experience marketing, entertainment, celebrities, and we talked about them identifying themselves with influencers. It's a massive deal for them. And that's a great entry point, and it's a no-brainer, but that's where they are still. And when it comes to Gen Y, you start seeing news networkers on social media and professional networkers. And B2C approach, even a B2B approach, would work with this audience. And they do follow brands, but they have very specific reasons to follow brands. And we also, of course, this is just for context, because it's indicative for the publishing industry. We know that, for example, Gen Zers and Gen Yers, around 15 to 20% are already paying for or subscribing to online TV. And linear TV is still massive. But it is, as you can see, online TV is climbing slowly but surely. But in APAC and Latin America, Gen Y already succumbed to online TV. News consumption, again, from a publisher's perspective, I think it's really good context. The daily routines are moving online. As you can see, news consumption on social media is quite big, but especially in the fast growth markets. What's interesting here is Europe, because Europe is, especially for news apps, it's doing quite poorly. However, in general, Gen Y is consuming news more online, so the routines are definitely moving online, but when it comes to apps, websites, social media in general, it looks like social media is the go-to place once again. Not to mention fake news. And when we look at entertainment content, so the chart you see on your left is watch the video or a clip or a vlog on mobile, and the one on the right-hand side is social video. So as you can see, Europe has taken quite a bit of a dip when it comes to social video because they are just not quite interested. Whereas we look at Latin America and Middle East and Africa and we see a completely different picture. What's interesting, of course, is video content still rules. It's just, again, the differences show themselves for fast growth regions. Now, this is the bit that will hopefully start to interest you a bit more. At Global Web Index, we do have data on e-readers. So this one is e-reader ownership. As you can see, North America, Europe, and Asia and Pacific is doing really well for e-reader ownership. But when we look at purchase in the last month before this data was collected, which is about 3 months ago, you see that actual regular purchase of e-books shrinks. Surprisingly, Asia Pacific is quite keen, which is super encouraging, of course. This is a recent study, a custom study. The data is about 3 weeks old, and this is US and UK sample only. So don't treat it as gospel regionally, but because they are huge markets, they are indicative. We know that e-readers or e-book readers are highly educated, a university degree or above. 25% still read on tablets. 7.6 out of people who have self-declared to read on e-readers or to read e-books have given up on print completely, which is something we always wonder, don't we? In terms of why they still buy print, because there is a sub-cohort for people who buy print, they say the usual, which I'm sure you are all aware of, which is collectability, shareability, tangibility, and the ability to donate, which is very interesting. One thing that is out of this whole thing, alternating between books, plus 42% saying, even if your ebook is free, I don't want any ads, is indicative. So this is just in general, regionally, how podcasts are doing. I'm going to speed up a little bit. Yeah. So Asia Pacific, again, fast regions are showing themselves. Middle East and Africa for podcasts is very interesting, and I don't know if we have anyone in the audience. But then we looked at podcasts, so similarly US, UK podcast audience. More educated, they are binge listening as well as listen one by one. 39% listen daily. Relevant ads are welcome. And they want normal, average Joe commentary rather than just expert commentary. Paying for digital content, Gen Y pay more, but of course, again, in line with the faster regions. We profiled paying digital content consumers, and of course, they want quality, they want offers, they want utility balanced with quality, and I suppose this is no news. When we turn to news, what we see is they want to fund what they value and what they read about. So there is something close to the heart that's about parting with the cash. And I think that's a very important point to dig even deeper into. And purchase considerations, this is great. I love this slide because, music streaming, of course, we know that's the norm. We know movie streaming is the norm now. But you can see that ebooks and podcasts are climbing. Podcasts I have covered extensively, mainly because we don't have audiobooks data yet, but it hopefully gives you an idea. And must-haves, of course, ad-free content, all access, benefits exclusive coverage, or something extra that comes with paying for digital content. And things to remember. So the mobile tipping point has occurred, and it's here, it's real. Internet and social media is purpose-driven. Consumers are getting savvier and pickier, and older groups are catching up, albeit more discerningly. And social media is entry to a whole new world of experiences, and paid content needs to balance utility and quality. And that's me. Thank you.
China, Indonesia, Southeast Asia in general, bar Singapore and probably Malaysia.
Mm-hmm. The sharing of devices responds to educational needs, especially in Tier 3, Tier 4 cities in China and Indonesia.
Africa, I really don't know what it responds about, since the levels of literacy tend to be lower. I imagine that when it comes to education, it also plays a role. Leaving education aside, is there any instance where digital devices are actually being shared to access fiction or any other genre? Thank you.
Yes, so in terms of why people use the internet, we do track top reasons to use internet. And actually, for faster growth regions, it's mainly actually education comes always in the top 3. And then comes entertainment and catching up with the world, and in some, I suppose, more savvy areas of the world, they are trying to keep in touch with the news as well. What's interesting, of course, is that we can do custom research into genres and more specific, even to the level of titles or authors. That is possible. You're right, education plays a big role, but I think the most important element to remember is even for social media, they actually do share those devices. And it's very difficult to know who is doing what. I mean, in the shared devices, e-readers are included. So it's just, so it's very tricky until we design a custom piece of research and understand. No, because market-specific data is different from regional data, even though they cover the same thing, but it's too broad for you when it's market-specific rather than region. Thank you.
One more question? It's okay? Okay, so